the Bank Secrecy Act here in the United States really lays at the core of a lot of these issues that we have talked about and will continue to talk about, particularly around KYC, AML, and uh, I believe the BSA was signed into law in like 1971. Funnily enough, 1970, 1971. That era was a Nixon era policy, if I recall correctly, and similar thing, obviously anti-money laundering. I think it was the first time it entered the lexicon, but that put some rules about knowing information about particular clients at banks, again, pertaining to how much money they were moving at any point in time. And it seems like over the years, particularly here in the United States, like the Bank Secrecy Act has been used and expanded, and things have been not added to the act itself, but the act has been used as an excuse to put more stringent compliance and regulations on companies outside the banking system, slowly but surely over time. And that turned into the fact that the United States economy is the largest in the world, and we're doing a lot of international commerce. It sort of pushed the entire globe, or the Western world particularly, towards this overarching compliance regime, which then brings in FATF, and it's sort of morphed into, again, this supranational regulatory, it's not officially a regulatory body, but essentially is a regulatory body, pushing all these compliance and regulations down people's throats. And the worst part about it is it's completely ineffective. If you actually look at the amount of quote unquote money laundering that is prevented by these compliance measures, it's minuscule, and it completely neglects the fact that criminals are going to criminal. Criminals, by default and by definition, do not care about your laws. So they're going to find a way to break it no matter what.
The initial, to your point, the initial kind of imposition of the United States' standards on the world was FATCA. Most countries, most non-U.S. citizens living abroad will remember FATCA, where, if they had a U.S. account in some Swiss bank or any other country in the world, they suddenly had to fill out a form, with some basic information, basically stating that they had they have no tax kind of liability to the United States. And that was the shot across the bow that started it all. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's devolved now into a frenzy. I in my years in this particular department, I haven't seen really anybody question the recommendations by the FATF. It's gospel. And it's sad to see that. As you mentioned, they're unelected. Now, the FATF does have a structure where countries meet. There's 40 countries currently which are full members, and they meet. They have plenaries, and they meet, and they look at the recommendations. They determine what should be added, removed, tweaked, and these deliberations take quite a bit of time. So there is participation from countries. However, the bureaucrats that go to these plenaries, they're not the elected officials. The elected officials go there. They're not the experts. They have all sorts of problems to deal with. So it's the bureaucrats, it's the people like me that will go to a plenary and submit some comments or some observations. And the worst part is that there are secondary members or observing members. There's 110 or so different countries that are secondary. So secondary means they can sit and observe in plenaries, but they can't speak. And so they have very, very little say on how the recommendations are drafted and forged and developed. So it's basically the rule of 40 countries on the rest of the world, and it's big. I don't see it going away anytime soon. Which is, I don't know what somebody like me can do just coming on this show. But the circumvention of due process, I think, is the biggest issue here, and probably the angle that can be taken to maybe tweak anti-money laundering regulations. I think it's impossible to do in a period of emergency. For example, the United States is still under the 9/11 state of emergency, right? It's renewed every year. And so there's a lot of things that can be done under a state of emergency, especially if it's, 24 years going on, right? It's the war on terror that causes a state of emergency to be renewed every year. And just like the war on drugs, I don't think the war on terror is going anywhere. So this is a perpetual state of emergency under which basically anything can be done. Soldiers can be sent. I think I'm not an expert on this, but the US state of emergency from 9/11 allows your government to go and send troops without going through Congress, which is, problem in and of itself. But it also allows the collection of information, the circumvention of due process. And it's a big thing. And it's not just in the US. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I don't live there, and now it's become global. So you may see it as a kind of a U.S.-led initiative, but it's way beyond that now. This is a global standard-setting body, which can now dictate what the U.S. has to do. It's grown to that point. Surely the U.S. has a big voice during those meetings, but it's not they don't have the ability to do whatever they want anymore. So from your perspective, you see the balance of power shift from, it shifted from the states to the federal government, and now it's shifting to a global organization. And so you are further removed as a citizen from keeping the people making the policy decisions and keeping them accountable. Good luck trying to find which bureaucrat went to the last plenary from your particular country, and then trying to find out what they suggested and why. And it becomes very, very difficult for governments to be held accountable if the policy decisions are being made overseas in a matter like this one. And we see this for, the WHO and the OECD. The OECD is the global standard setting body for taxes. They're implementing a global minimum tax, 20%. And so if your industry is, part of a taxable kind of industry, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to be taxed 20% by somebody. Even if you go to a tax-free jurisdiction like BVI or the Caribbean, the BVI might not charge it, but other countries can, because it's what the OECD says that should be done. So it's concerning to me, and I think the whole system could benefit from some transparency and awareness.
Hey, do you still have your Bitcoin on an exchange? Don't hold your Bitcoin on an exchange. Take it into self-custody. If you're looking for an easy way to do that, we have the BitKey. BitKey is Bitcoin made easy to use and hard to lose. Take the first step, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Check out the link in the show notes. That'll get you 20% off your BitKey, or use the code TFTC20 at checkout.